I am obviously not the only ardent admirer in this room of Ralph Fiennes and his work. I'm also going to ask that we just raise the lights a little bit, because right now all we see is this black void, and I always have a preference for, that's much better. Now we can see you too, which is, I think, desirable. I'm going to ask a few questions about the marvelous film we've just watched, and then a bit about your career, and we will take questions from the audience before we leave. I do want to know about the origin. I know that there was a book by Julie Kavanaugh, Rudolf Nureyev, The Life, back in 1998. Was that one of the points of departure for you, or had you been aware of Nureyev when you were younger? Was this someone who...
No, I know Julie Kavanaugh a bit. I mean, there are obviously many other biographies and available material about Nureyev, but Julie Kavanaugh was about to publish Nureyev, The Life, and I know her a bit, and she sent me the first 5 chapters in proof copy, just the 5 chapters. And until recently, I didn't really know why. As I was being asked questions about it, I just would say, well, I was sent these first 5 chapters, and I was trying to recollect why she might have sent them. I thought, well, it couldn't have been because I was directing, because then I wasn't directing anything. And it wasn't because I had aspirations to be a dancer. So why did she send it? Did I have a Russian curiosity about things Russian? Maybe that was why she sent it. And I said to her recently, I said, why did you send me those 5 chapters? And she said, well, I thought you were going to pass them on to Anthony Minghella. But I don't remember that bit. Anyway, I read it, and the story just blew me away. I didn't have any interest in ballet. I knew who Nureyev was, but I'd never seen him dance. But it was just the story of this young boy from a very poor part of Central Russia, Soviet Russia, with this incredible sense of destiny about being a dancer, a sort of ferocious sense of himself becoming a dancer, and the story of the childhood and the desire to get to Leningrad, which was a huge thing for him to get to this city of Russian culture. Even under Soviet times, it was the intellectual capital. And getting there, and then the dance school, and then finally Paris, 1961, and this situation at the airport. So it just leapt off the page as an amazing story for a film. And then some years later, I've worked on 2 films with Gabby Tanner producing, and it was Gabby who knew of my interest in the story, who said, well, do you want to do this? Because I think if you do, we should move on it. And I think she sort of pushed me to really commit to it, really, and then that was about 2014. But it always sat sort of on my shoulder somewhere as this thing that should be made. And then when Gabby said, are you going to make this? I realized that I didn't want anyone else to make it. I mean, lots of films, I know there's lots of documentaries and drama documentaries, but I don't believe there is a full feature drama about this event in his life, or indeed about his life at all. And there's many, many, many documentaries.
Sure. And I'm assuming that the chapters you received, and ultimately the book, were more chronological. In other words, the flashback structure that we've just seen in the film, I'm assuming that this was something that either you decided on or you brought in David Hare to write the script adaptation.
David is the key element here. So much of what this film is because of David's creation, screenplay. I came with the idea of the story, but he was the person who sort of did the heavy lifting on what it would be as a film. We worked together a lot and talked about what it would be. I think if he has said and would say, I'm sure if he was here, that what he responded to was the Paris element, because he grew up with I think his cinematic awareness was sort of came into sort of fruition during the Nouvelle Vague in the 60s, and so for him, Paris 60s was very evocative for him as a rich cinematic period. So he leapt on that aspect. And I think he sort of, his first response was, oh, it could be just a film set in Paris with the friendship of Clara and Rudy. And I sort of countered that with, well, yes, but I think we need to know where he's from and who he is and what he's come from. So I pushed the Russian side of it and the childhood side of it. And we both embraced each other's perspectives. But I remember a discussion where I said, well, I can see the flashback of it, but please can it not be, or I didn't want it to be what I would call a polite flashback structure of a sort of framework of arrival in Paris, extended flashback to past life and back to Paris. Or I thought we should be braver with how we could make a portrait of this young dancer. And it was David who came up with the idea of these 3 time frames, which sort of, in fact, each time frame is chronological within itself, but they intertwine with each other. And I suppose we both felt there was quite an exciting way of, by juxtaposing the different scenes from different time frames, you could sort of get a more vital way of portraying someone by putting, say, the boy crying for his father in the woods, going into Rudy's face looking at the Sainte-Chapelle ceiling. And those sort of editorial jumps seemed dynamic and exciting, as opposed to just a linear, progressive. But you could do that way as well. We just found ourselves, as writer-director, being excited by what the time frames could do, bouncing off of each other. And when I read that was the ideas stage, and when I read the first draft, it was very exciting to feel what it could be. So that's how it came about.
Well, you almost include within the film an indication to us of how to watch it. The line, I think, of Pushkin to Rudy is, the steps are interconnected.
Yeah.
And then they have a discussion about, well, your character asks Rudy, why dance? And the point is, if I remember correctly, we've talked about this backstage, I studied Russian in college. Что я хочу сказать? The line, what do I want to say, is then it becomes, what is my story? And what your structure does is it gives us the story behind the public figure of Nureyev. In other words, you make us far more active as viewers, piecing together the kaleidoscopic, not only time frames, but what I found to be the wonderful montage of, for example, going from his bloody foot to the foot of the statue, or the hands of the father around the son that suddenly become the huge hands of the painting. So we start to understand something about cinematic storytelling
exactly.
in learning about Rudy's story. And I mean, look, David Hare also adapted The Reader, which you starred in with Kate Winslet, which we showed on this stage, first screening ever of that movie. And I think he has an understanding of how you can engage the viewer much more viscerally if you have us work harder from the very beginning to understand how the kaleidoscopic pieces fit together.
That's right, that's it.
And you had also done the wonderful trilogy. I don't know how many here are familiar with David Hare's Warwicker trilogy. It was done for British television. Page 8, Turks and Caicos and Salting the Battlefield. These are wonderful movies. And you play a nasty prime minister very well, I might add.
Well, I thought he was the hero.
Okay. Speaking of playing what might or might not be a hero, at the Telluride Film Festival, I remember asking you on the panel at what point you decided to play Pushkin. And the answer was a bit shocking, which was, I didn't want to play him, you said, but the financing kind of required it, right?
Well, no, that is essentially true. I mean, I could see when I read, when we were talking about what the film would be and what scenes we would incorporate and what characters from the biographical material we would incorporate, Pushkin leapt off the resource material as clearly a key figure in Nureyev's life, and Nureyev himself is on record many times as acknowledging Pushkin. And when I read David's first draft, it was clear this was a wonderful part for an actor. With the scene where he says, "Why do we dance? What's the purpose of dance?" And Rudolf, as you saw, says, "Is it to escape or to give the audience some escape?" And no, it's what is your story, And that's so many scenes where. But I wanted to cast Russian actors in Russian parts and French actors in French parts and have them all speak their native language where they would have done. But there was a point when the finance was so difficult, and I was inviting a lot of great Russian actors who you see in the film, Chulpan Khamatova, who plays my wife, who's a fantastic actress. And I was looking for Pushkin, and I had found a Russian actor who I thought was really great for it. But I could feel that the sort of finance bodies that were interested were not. It was the elephant in the room that I had said, I'm not playing anything in this film. And then eventually it was a Russian producer who didn't in the end put any money in, but did say to me, "Why are you not playing Pushkin? Because there would be investment in your film if you did." And at that point, because of where we were with them, I folded. So I sort of break my own rule, really, because I wanted to have it purely Russians being Russians. But I had actually made a film in Russian. I mean, I have minimal sort of functional, sort of simple Russian, but I'd done a film in Russian, and I was able to build on the limited Russian that I have with a fantastic teacher. And I was familiar with the translations that we were getting. So I'm glad I'd made this other film in Russian, which is very scary, with a Russian director who I love. But that I think that was the thing that made me feel, well, it's going to be tough, but I will do it. So
well, to my semi-trained ear, the Russian seemed flawless. There was no point at which because I sometimes can hear, though I don't speak the language fluently, if something isn't quite on, and that never happened. But I'm wondering if, to some extent, the plausibility or the persuasiveness of your performance isn't partly because there's a relationship between the way Pushkin is training Rudolf and the other dancers and the way that you seem to be directing actors. All right, what I'm trying to say here is I love the scene where you're so understated, where Pushkin is merely suggesting like when he tells Nureyev to do it again, he doesn't tell him what to change. He just has him do it again. You cast in the lead someone who is a dancer but had never acted in a film. And I'm guessing that you had to work with Oleg Ivenko in a manner that is perhaps connected to what Pushkin is doing with Nureyev.
Well, Pushkin famously, I think I'm right, from what had a very delicate way of teaching. There is a ballet approach to teaching which is quite assertive, and I've seen a teacher go up and literally manipulate quite aggressively the dancer's body into the right position. And I think that literal hands-on approach wouldn't be acceptable in Western ballet schools maybe, but I think in Russia it still is acceptable that you literally go and move someone's body. I think Pushkin was not like that. I think he would indicate or hint or kind of suggest or tell the person, no, a bit like that scene, I think, which was, no, try it again. So you would understand you hadn't got it right. But I think it was all that idea of teaching whereby the student has to discover their mistake, that it's a bit more, and thereby if the student or the pupil intuits, discovers, and corrects themselves, then they have a greater understanding of the thing that they've corrected, which makes sense to me, I must say. What was the other part of the question?
Was that related to how you
Oleg,
worked with your actors?
Yes, well, Oleg, yeah. No, I'm afraid, Oleg is a wonderful natural screen actor, I believe. But there were times, I didn't force him around. But I think with the limited, actually it's very interesting because he really has a fantastic instinct for the scenes and the nuances. I didn't have to, we did a lot of work in preparation where I would I'd had ideas of the scenes, how they would be staged, I had imagined them, and I would take him through. And I would just, I suppose, the most essential thing that I wanted him to understand was
was to be focused.
I believe that an essence, I mean, another actor might disagree with me, but I believe that to be really unself-conscious and present as a screen actor, so you are in the... I think film likes completely natural, like we're talking now in the present, we don't know what I'm going to say next, and you're nodding to me, and we're all completely present. And these little shifts of energy that are present tense real life happening between two people who don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 seconds, that is, I think, that you just nodded your head. Now that had its own life moment energy. No, but like that. All those little things that I think there's little life shifts of body, energy, mind, energy. There's tiny little everyday things. You can call it behaviorism if you like. But I think if you sit in the place where as an actor those things are alive in you, then I think film likes that spontaneity, that it's just ripples of real life, ripples of thought, emotion. And I think if you can't always be in that place, but I think if you can somehow sit there so your interior life is alive, then things happen that are interesting for the camera. And it's all about trying to get Oleg to understand it's less about projecting, certainly in a naturalistic, realistic drama like this. Don't project that you're angry or that you're upset or that you're irritated. If you are inside, if I have an irritation in me and then it will show in my face. It'll be inside me, and the camera will read it. And I remember that the conversation I had about screen acting that always stayed with me was with the Hungarian director István Szabó, who directed.
They made a wonderful film called Sunshine about 20 years ago.
Yeah, about 20 years ago. And I sat with István before we made the film, and we had a lunch, and he said to me, for me, cinema is about the close-up, when thoughts and feelings are born on the face for the first time. And I always remembered that. He always believed that he'd always ask his actors, please rehearse only technically. Don't give me your performance in the rehearsal. Because he wanted to preserve the virgin moment of when you were finally, the film was running, and he would hope that might be, it didn't always happen, but he would hope that might be the moment when the fresh, spontaneous thing could happen. So really with Oleg, it was trying to, and he did it, he understood it.
But did you have to spend more time either in rehearsal or improvising once you were shooting because he was not accustomed to film?
I just knew that I must have as much time rehearsing with him as I possibly could, because on the day when you're filming and you've got concerns about lighting and camera positions and the other actors, and that I wanted him to be as grounded as possible in the scene, so that the motivation or the thinking behind every line and the moments and the relationships and what is going on, and trying to guide him, to give him, as it were, as much guidance about, I suppose, in a funny way, I was preparing Nureyev with him as if I might be acting Nureyev, in the sense that I would think through the part of Nureyev, just what's going on, what are the reactions, what's the feeling, what is the emotion, I remember I had to access my own actor's response to the essential shift in every scene as something to offer up to him. And sometimes, I'm thinking is that there are very subtle moments which I love, but when he does, there's a scene when Clara confronts him after he's been really rude to her, when he's got his prize at the reception. And she says something like, aren't you going to apologize? And he goes, what for? And then she says, for being the most selfish man I've ever met. And I said, Oleg, there's something in his reaction, which is, he's not the sort of man who's ever going to say, oh yes, I'm so sorry. But he just gives this brilliant sort of look as if to say, maybe It's something in his face which is so subtle, which is, I'm not really going to take that on board, but I can't deny that I haven't heard it. It's just very, but it was getting him to sort of enjoy those subtle things, that you can do on film, I suppose.
And I'm curious because this is a dancer. In fact, he was a soloist, or maybe still is, of the ballet company of the M. Jalil Tatar State Academic Opera and Ballet Theater in Kazan, Russia.
That's right.
How did you first become aware of him? And what was it that convinced you that he could actually act and not merely dance the part? Did you, for example, have him do a particular scene from the screenplay that gave you the confidence for his performance?
Well, first of all, we did a big casting sweep through all the Russian-speaking ballet world, ballet companies, ballet schools. The word was put out online, I think, on social media. So there was a casting director, Alla Petelina, who's a wonderful casting director from St. Petersburg. She led this whole. In fact, she had to cast Nureyev before for another film that never happened. So she had done the Nureyev search before. For a dancer too, and then the film didn't happen. Anyway, Oleg was on the radar quite early on, and he stayed on the shortlist and was there when we did screen tests for about 4 or 5 candidates. And I could see very quickly that he was very unself-conscious and at ease in front of the camera. And I remember I had to guide him. He's a very generous, open, sweet-natured boy. And I had to guide him a bit on the sort of what I imagine was sort of Rudolph's ability to look at you as if, like, who are you? What are you asking me? A slight defensive, slightly looking at. I sort of had this sense of him from footage I've seen and him talking that he could look at you as if, are you challenging me? Is something sort of quite slightly aggressive, slightly intimidating, a sort of mischievous hauteur, I suppose you might call it. But I just remember seeing the footage from the screen test, thinking, I think that's it. Not because he was able to respond to my direction, and he, at times, has a proximity to Nureyev in the face. But I said, I think this is the guy. But then I brought him back again to workshop him in what I've just talked about, this kind of interior. So I remember I did a scene, it was about the Sainte-Chapelle scene. I said, I want you to imagine you're seeing something that is really moving you. I'll let you think of what it is, but I want you to come into a room and be profoundly moved by something that you're seeing, which he did. And I felt I saw glimpses of someone starting to exercise this sort of inner life, inner emotions, and it's a difference between sort of demonstrating emotion in your face, as to actually having the courage and the patience to let it gather in you, I suppose. But when we came to shoot the scene in the Sainte-Chapelle, we had 1.5 hours to film it early in the morning in Paris, and I had going to rehearse the actors going in, and I didn't want Oleg to see it. So I tried the Istvan Sabo approach of shooting his first reaction for real, for the first time, because he'd never seen it. And so that's what you see in the film.
Wow. And this week of all weeks, seeing Paris's sacred architecture, carries an extra wallop. Mm-hmm. Now, Nureyev actually in 1977 played Rudolph Valentino in Ken Russell's biopic. I was curious whether you saw that either at the time or in preparation for this film.
I've not seen it.
Okay. I remember it as being sort of dubious, but okay, I won't go into that. Did you watch any films about dance or dancers in preparation for this? Because one thing I noticed is that you wisely present the full body of Nureyev when he's dancing. You don't go in for, shall we say, the Bob Fosse cabaret thing of, abstracting the musical number for purposes beyond the body of the actors and dancers. Fred Astaire, I don't know, were there any films?
The truth is, I was way out of my comfort zone in the ballet. I didn't have a ballet background. I mean, once I was doing this project, I immersed myself in watching ballet documentaries, seeing lots and lots of footage of Nureyev dancing, and all that stuff, especially performance, is all the full body. And I think part of me got impatient with this, so I thought, I want to get in there with the camera and get really close. And when we got to doing it, I did some of that, and we shot full. I wanted to have a range of stuff to cut to, but actually it didn't work. It didn't work because you couldn't appreciate what the dancer's doing. If you're cutting around, it can be editorially dynamic, but you don't. I didn't feel my eye was getting pleasure from seeing what the full body is doing. So we regrouped and we reshot some of it because of that, and also we just thought generally even Oleg felt he could do better with the dancing. And then we also had a techno crane, so the crane could push in and move back with the dancer, which we didn't have the first time round. And then it was immediately better because because Johann Coburg, who's a dancer turned choreographer, was a great leading dancer at the Royal Ballet, sort of said to me, well, the thing is, why isn't, I said, I like that shot. He said, well, because the dancer's up, and he's high and the camera's low and he's behind. He said, well, it's okay, but it looks ugly to me, Rafe, because the dancer has this front. The ballet is designed, I meant to show you specifically this angle of my body. That's designed to present to you. I'm not showing you this bit of my body. That's not. And in the end, I felt that's what I must respect. That's what Nureyev, the dancers are very sensitive to how they're filmed, and there's stories of dancers going, my foot isn't quite straight and my line isn't quite good enough, and things that the layperson wouldn't appreciate, but they are very focused on precisely the thing they're showing the audience. So I went and hit a wall, realized I was wrong, and reversed the car and went on a better road, I think.
But that's sometimes one of the elements that distinguishes a really good director from somebody who's, kind of just making a movie, where you learn from your mistakes, let's say, or from the limitations, and then create something new. I mean, I mentioned Fred Astaire only because he was one of the first to revolt against what was then the Hollywood tradition of photographing dancers from a variety of odd angles in order to exploit their cinematic expressiveness, right. Busby Berkeley being the great example. And Astaire said, no, you have to keep the camera on my full body moving in space the entire time. Yeah. And that was radical at the time, but has since become the standard way to capture performance of a dancer's body in space. Mm-hmm. Now, to go into something else, I think I noticed in your credits that one of the producers was Liam Neeson. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Could you, I love Liam Neeson, he was on this stage, but I was wondering how that connection?
Liam helped with some money towards starting the film.
I like him even more now. Good for him.
Yeah.
It pays to do some of these thrillers taken 1, 2, 3, because if you can help your colleague, that's a good reason.
No, I remember actually it was great because Liam was very, forthright in his views, and he said I showed him a sizzle reel or a mood reel I had before I was making it, and he responded. I could see his face lit up at Oleg because I had bits of Oleg's screen test, and he said, Rafe, I think this is a really exciting project. And he said, that boy is great. He's got it. He's a star. Rafey, he's a star, he said.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Now, of course, you and Liam Neeson go back to Schindler's List, which created, I think, the trajectory of your career as well as his. And I hope you don't mind, backstage I mentioned that my most recent book, Cinematic Overtures, How to Read Opening Scenes, is about how the opening sequence of a film prepares you to watch the rest of it. And I couldn't help but notice that you've got this triadic opening structure. It begins with Pushkin being interrogated and saying, oh, Nureyev, it must have been an explosion of character. I love that line. Then we suddenly go back to the sepia tone of the train in which Rudy will be born in that moving train. And then you bring us into color as the plane. We actually meet Rudolph for the first time in that plane. And I was curious because it seemed like Schindler's List, which has really a triadic opening structure, not the identical one, but it introduces the visual texture, the sepia, different time elements. Was that opening in the script? Was it something that came about in post-production? Did you feel that there was any connection to Spielberg's way of opening that film?
No, actually, no, the film, we wrestled with the film in the editing. I mean, some bits of it fell into place, other things were not working as we had hoped. Some of the time, some scenes, a couple of scenes I don't think I had quite directed well enough, and they didn't quite make the cut. But generally, just structurally, we wrestled with how to guide the story between the three time frames. Sometimes it felt, as I say, very strong. Other times, we didn't quite know how to steer the ship, as it were. And I remember showing it when we had a cut of sorts. I showed it to a producer friend of mine who said, I don't know what he sort of led me towards. He said, the film starts, I don't know what the stakes are. I don't know what it's... this interrogation of Pushkin was written as a whole scene to happen at the end. So once he had defected, there would be the interrogation of Pushkin, which was quite a long scene. So in response to my friend's comments, and I think it was his suggestion, we divided up the scene and put some of that scene right at the front. And the moment that we did that, it immediately, suddenly the film is charged with this accusation, this interrogation. And then you have one of those wonderful things when a line like an explosion of character suddenly has magic when immediately after it you cut to the train. And the train was always in there at the beginning. I think it started with the interior of the train and then went to the aeroplane that he's traveling in. But suddenly putting that bit of the Pushkin scene, which has a nice effect when you come to it at the end. So that was how that came about. But that does, you're right, it leads, what's the word,
Triadic.
Triadic. It has this, no, it has that's the triadic introduction.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Listen, in my classes at Columbia...
I knew it was triadic,
we spend so much time with film students trying to figure out what are the best ways to open and to structure a film. Very often it is linear. And by the way, your film could have worked quite well, even if you had begun with the birth of Nureyev in the train and then the childhood, and you could have done it that way. And I like the fact that you went from a train to an airplane, establishing a kind of lateral movement that's important to the entire film. But a great challenge to a filmmaker is how do you energize and activate the audience as well as the film?
True.
So that's where, for me, all of this actually comes back to. Now, you've worked with so many amazing filmmakers, many of whom we've had on this stage, like Anthony Minghella or Stephen Daldry, Robert Redford with Quiz Show. I mean, the list goes pretty long. The Coen brothers, Wes Anderson, Neil Jordan, Catherine Bigelow, Fernando Meirelles, etc. What interests me is because you have become a director with 3 features to your credit, were there particular filmmakers that taught you the most in terms of your then being able to take on the directorial responsibility? Like whether it was Spielberg or Joel Cohen, what were you able to learn on a set that gave you the confidence, first with Coriolanus, then with The Invisible Woman, and now this?
One of the things I've never forgotten, Steven Spielberg's energy on a film set, because he's on Schindler's List. I mean, that's the only film I've made with him 26 years ago now. But I remember his vigor and his sort of vocal lack of restraint. I mean, you could tell immediately he knew everything about lenses, cameras, angles, and he was making strong decisions. We'll put a 50 on that, but the dolly here, I want to come around like, he was being, and I'd only done a handful of films, maybe 2 features and 1 television drama, but it was incredibly exciting to feel his adrenalized vocal presence on a film set. And I think film crews and cast respond. They love that decisiveness, especially when it's clearly he was alive with ideas on that film. And I always remember, 'cause I've subsequently been on sets where the director might be very good, but there's a sort of, as they think a bit, or it all emanates from the director. The energy, the feeling of a film set, I think, does come from the director. And I always felt that was something when I suppose directed Coriolanus. I just thought it's really important to your presence as you articulate or ask for or suggest should be unapologetic and full of a kind of vigor, that you're sharing your enthusiasm and your enthusiasm for other people's input, and you kind of are, I mean, not to retreat into a sort of thinky, meditative thing. I mean, I love it as an actor when directors come and say, that's good to me. I mean, they talk to you. There's a tradition now of directors hiding in the sort of tent, looking at a monitor, and they relay their directions to the first AD. And I think it's great to feel their personality present and communicating. Anthony Minghella also I think about a lot, because he has had a wonderful way of nurturing performance. And I think of all the directors I've been lucky enough to work with, he has had the gift of sort of genuinely wanting you to explore a moment, a scene, a take, and seeing what could happen. And he wrote The English Patient, and he did sometimes say, I like how you're saying these lines, it's really interesting, it's not at all how I expected they would sound. Could you please try the version that I had in my head, and I don't want to give you a line reading, but it was sort of like this. And then I would go, okay, I get it, don't have to say it, I get it, I'll do it. And then he would say, I remember a few times he said, you've given me, he used to say, it was a bit, it's sort of slightly, what he would say was slightly, I suppose, there's a regional theatre, a very good one in Leicester called the Leicester Haymarket, but he kept on saying, you've given me the Leicester Haymarket version, which was, I suppose he meant the sort of regional repertory, slightly predictable line reading, but he would pay the compliment of saying the thing you were doing was interesting, or he would say, no, actually, he would just, he had the kind of generosity or the confidence maybe to say, run with it, run with what I've written, and he would say, maybe it's this. I mean, he had a truly kind of, a curiosity is what I'm trying to say, about what the actor could do with it, and I try to remember that when I'm, and I think I love, it's very rewarding when you see an actor start to play with a line or a moment, and suddenly something else happens that surprises them. And the more options you have when you're editing, I think you have more options and with the way how you can build a scene.
And in a very different context, I'm remembering that the last time you were on this stage was with the White Countess. Mm-hmm. This was back in 2005, and this was a Merchant Ivory production, co-starring Natasha Richardson.
Yep.
I think back, we've lost Anthony Minghella and Natasha Richardson, but I was wondering whether the Merchant Ivory influence might have animated your direction of The Invisible Woman, because that's a period drama, Charles Dickens, and Merchant Ivory, they were known particularly for the very literate films that dealt with layers of the emotional and psychological dimensions of characters. I don't know if that was something that you felt, or not as much.
I can't say that I did. Well, I remember on Invisible Woman that the director that I think is one of the great geniuses of cinema is Yasujiri Ozu, Japanese director who, in his sort of mature stage, made these films. Sorry if you know this, but they're all fixed camera, and it's just the cuts, and there's no camera movement. I mean, his earlier films do have camera movement, in fact, but there's a sort of cumulative power that comes from the camera never moving, and there's control of the performance just in cuts. I mean, it's sort of, you would call it slow today, but if you watch Ozu film through, as you would know, so it was the idea that you just hold a frame and things happen in the frame. So that's not the case with all of The Invisible Woman, but in some scenes that we do attempt something on those lines, going between close-ups, which is very, very classic, it's very traditional, but there's a sort of power. If the performance is full, a sort of, some people might say it's very boring, but if you watch an Ozu film, it's really not. It's just, but he tests you. You have to really commit to watching. They're so used now to fast cutting or camera movement, and so it's the opposite of the sort of cinema language we might be used to, I suppose.
No, you've been experimenting, I think, in all three features with a very different style. I have a lot more questions, but I have a feeling that some of you do too. So for our last, okay, there's a gentleman on the aisle first, and then I saw a hand here, and then one in the first row. Okay, the gentleman on the aisle, go ahead. I'm just going to ask you to stop for 1 second. Does everyone hear this, or should I repeat a little bit? I mean, it has to do with, the question is about the relationship that Ralph Fiennes might have to dance, not just ballet, but that in his, for example, introduction as Lord Voldemort, the way he glides, and an allusion also to the Grand Budapest Hotel of Wes Anderson.
In retrospect, would you say that maybe when you look back, do you see that dancing in your acting?
In retrospect,
A whole new career is.
do you see the dancing in your acting?
I'm flattered that you think so.
Well, there is, I mean, if one, to push your question a little bit, obviously, even though your mellifluous voice is one of the things that we identify with a number of your characters, there is something about the physical grace, and it almost leads me to the opposite kind of character, a bigger splash, where your manic exuberance is Harry when you dance. It's a different sense of the physical origin of character.
But the gentleman, no, I was very conscious of looking for a physicality for Voldemort. Absolutely, you're right. I mean, he has, J.K. Rowling describes his sort of snake-like persona. And, when I had these long, flowing, silky robe to wear, it's sort of dictated. I mean, it actually helps sell, the sort of, the flowing robes help sell a bit of the danciness. And I was very, in fact, I remember with the costume fitting for Monsieur Gustave, they were fitting me with this sort of very quite correct, quite stiff, formal sort of hotel valet gear, I mean, precise. And it was all feeling a bit thick and heavy the way it was sitting on me. It was very structured. And I remember saying to Milena Canonero, who did the clothes, I said, I feel a bit constricted. I think I need to be light on my feet, like a dancer, I remember saying. So yes, I remember saying that to her in a costume fitting. It's true. And then a bigger splash required me to dance. Yeah.
Memorably, yes. Why was Pushkin so sad?
Well, I saw it as being more meditative than sad.
As if life were too much for him.
I don't. No, seriously, I don't think I think interesting that you know, as an actor, you often follow an instinct which you can't put into words, and things come across to audiences which are absolutely valid responses, which maybe you don't. I don't think I consciously intended to play sadness at all. I wanted to play a sort of a gentle person who's alert and delicate and watching, and so maybe something in what I was doing suggests a sadness, and there's nothing. I don't feel there's anything wrong if that's the feeling you take from it. I mean,
she's asking, were there others who felt the sadness as well?
I don't. Yeah.
Oh, maybe we should just attribute this to a Russian kind of melancholy. Maybe that is a sort of almost cultural assumption that your face carries.
I don't know. I mean, like the scene at the dinner part, when they asked you, Rudy, for dinner, I wouldn't call that. I mean, listen, I completely respect if that's what you felt. That's fine. But I think I was sort of. It was a scene where Pushkin is gently pushing his student on what is the purpose of dance. So it's a sort of lesson, and what I see when I see it, but obviously it's really highly subjective because I'm watching myself, and I don't know how to label the performance at all. But I see a sort of a teacher with humor pushing his student to think a bit more deeply. So I wouldn't say in that particular scene there's sadness being, I mean, certainly at the end when he opens a suitcase, I think you can feel the sense of loss, and certainly in the interrogation scenes, there's the weight of the loss of the boy and the defection, so you could call that sadness. But I completely respect if that's what you felt. That's fine. I mean,
okay, right here, and then we'll go right there. Yes.
I am a truly great admirer of your work, and I've noticed in your films that you've directed, there's a through line of desire in your characters. Coriolanus as a leader in war and a desire against his enemies, and Dickens, primarily what really stood out was the sexual and romantic desire of Felicity Jones's character, and in this, a desire for freedom. And I was wondering what drove you to the inherent human desire.
I'm going to try to repeat the question. As a great admirer, I'm asking, is there this through line I've noticed in your work where the protagonists of the films you've directed have this desire, whether it is that of Coriolanus as a leader, a desire to vanquish his enemies, in The Invisible Woman, more of the desire sexually, romantically, of Felicity Jones' character Nellie, and in this film, perhaps a desire for freedom. Would that be accurate?
Yes, I suppose. I mean, people have been asking. I suppose both. There's a sense of will or purpose. I mean, Coriolanus is uncompromising to a fault. I mean, Nellie is. It's interesting because Nellie has got desire. She's also having to negotiate the desire of Dickens, which is very strong. So that's a kind of negotiation between a man and a woman about their mutual desires, but in a particular context of Victorian morality. But the huge desire or will, there's a lot of will going on, I suppose. There's will to realize. There's huge. I mean, I think the thing that moved me about the story of Nureyev is this uncompromising desire, if you like, to realize himself as a dancer, and as a sort of ferocious, take no prisoners. This is what I will do, and it's a bit scary, but it's very pure, and it's sort of it pushes you away, but it's also, I think, whether it's there are performance artists that their personalities can be outrageous or provocative or difficult, but I think Nureyev had some extraordinary life force that ran through him. It was sort of pure, and so the norms of social intercourse and behavior were sort of not part of his vocabulary. I just think he had this thing, and it put itself into dance, and that's what he was there to do. And so it's a bit of a cul-de-sac when people go, oh, but his terrible behavior and this. I think, well, yes, but he dances. I mean, actually, with Claire Tomalin, who wrote the book of Invisible Woman, when we had situations like this, and people would ask me, I sat and talked to Claire many times, and the first sort of go-to thing was, oh, Dickens was so awful. He was such a shit to his wife in the way, which is true. It was absolutely true. But Claire Tomalin, who's a biographer principally of women and champions the histories of women writers and actresses, and would have absolutely no time for this accusation. She would say, yes, of course, it wasn't good, but he wrote all these books. He did what he had to do.
But it's important that in The Invisible Woman, you actually show what an awful character. I mean, Dickens mistreating his wife and urinating into a bedpan. I mean, that's not the sort of a scene I would have expected, but you show...
He doesn't urinate into, he urinates into a loo.
Into a loo. Oh, I'm sorry.
Not a bed.
Sorry.
Doesn't.
All I remember was the urinating, because I thought, what?
There are limits.
What a detail.
There are limits.
Oh, I'm so bad that I misremembered that scene, but it stayed with me in a curious way. Yes, you had a question. The question was, Pushkin ever aware that his wife was cheating on him? That's why he's so sad,
yes,
was the comment in the first row.
Thank you, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
I thought it was a matzah for a moment.
No, I think, no. I mean, the film, I think David in the script and we don't, and I think it's there for you to decide, but I think that I certainly, in the scene where Pushkin's had the unhappy moment when Nureyev throws a suitcase at him, and then Ksenia comes home and detects the difficult atmosphere and says to Rudy, you can't be on your own. There's no such thing as a person who can be utterly on their own and not rely on other people. And Pushkin watches it, and I definitely remember playing that he knew, he could feel that something had gone on between them. Yeah.
Yes, gentleman here.
Hi, Ray. My name's Bob Turner. We met a long time ago, and I just wanted to ask you, of all the different movies you've done, after you wrap a movie, I'm sure you leave that movie thinking, this movie touched me in such a way, and it impacts your career and every other film you make. How does this particular movie impact you now that it's wrapped and you're looking at it?
When a film is wrapped, you realize that the film may have had a particular impact on you and your career. How do you feel now that this film is wrapped? What kind of impact this film has had on you?
Well, it was very challenging to make, and we took, I think Gabby Tanner, who produced it, bravely took on huge challenges to find the resources to make it. And it was at times quite scary finding the money and of course taking on something like Nureyev, who is so huge for so many people, and just the anxiety about, I wanted it to be it's the Russian language and the French language, so it's challenging to distributors to take on a film like this. So it was fraught with risk and fraught with the thing getting it right. Are we going to get Nureyev right? So it was exhausting to deal with all the challenges that we took on, and so I think I'm still trying to sort of recovering from it. But it's very gratifying to, as it were, situations like this, being here tonight, and as the film's released in the States, in New York, this coming week. So and that's the way you make it, so that you can see it, and to feel the audience is engaging with it. And of course, there are a spectrum of responses, but there is a kind, and I don't quite know all I know is that it sort of was a totally all-absorbing thing that took up every sort of part of my brain and heart for a long time, and it's at this stage when it's being released into the world, it's slightly dreamlike, because we finished it about nearly not quite a year ago, and yet I'm still feel very close to the decisions. And of course, as people see it, and we have situations like this where I feel the energy of you just having seen it, it still feels quite fresh, even though I finished. I have a complicated set of reactions to it, I suppose is what I'm saying. I haven't quite sort of put it to bed somehow. Sorry, that's the best I can say.
And to be precise, we'll take one or two more questions, but this film opens Friday at the landmark 57th Street on the west side. It opens at Cinema 123. We're filled with gifts tonight. Cinema 123 and the Angelica. Yes.
Outside of your own acting experience.
Thank you. Sorry.
This is a record. I've had many guests, but never this many gifts.
I'll pick it up.
Seriously? You are very well loved. No, I think maybe it's because in ballet they throw flowers at the dancer, and you've all been so inspired.
I feel very embarrassed. Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to let this question be articulated. Yes.
But outside of your own acting experience, how else did you train as a director? And I'm also curious to know what the budget was.
Outside of your own acting experience, how did you train to be a director? And can you tell us what the budget was on this film?
I'm not going to tell you what the budget was. I think it was a challenging budget for an independent film. But training, no, I think my training, it was just watching directors. Just watching and being directed, and yeah, just that really. I mean, how directors communicate and how actors respond, and just I suppose you just absorb a lot. I find myself every time in making a film as an actor, you're very aware of why is it working, or why does it feel difficult? What are the things I wish there's always an interesting thing where the energy flows from the director to the actors and to the crew, and other times it doesn't. And it's usually when the director has the purpose of the director, even if they're not like Spielberg and he's talking very vocally, but you just sense that the purpose that they intend, or the story there, you just sense that it's there in them. But I don't know really. I mean, I think there's a sort of reality that's on the ground when you're on the day, when you've just. I don't have a theory of directing. I just have the actors and the story and the thing that I've thought about it, and I want to realize it, and I think being inhibited is not a help. I think to be open as you can. I feel as an actor, if I feel the director is sort of smoke screening or playing games or not, I don't find that. I like directness and like clarity of expression from a director, and no bullshit. Just if the director might say, "This isn't working, Rafe. It needs to be this," or "This is great," or "Can we anything?" Just be straight with me. Don't obfuscate. And if the director says, "I'm sorry, I've got this wrong. I need to shoot this again," that's better than some kind of pretense that. It's just like it's a sort of honesty, really, about it. I can't, but it was again going to Stephen. It was a sort of sheer, clear line of intent as he asked for what he needed and directed his crew, and it was just very, very clear. It was uncluttered.
Well, it seems to me that it's all about storytelling, and that's one of the things that this film is about, finding what is your story. And you've done this so magnificently as an actor, realizing the visions of other directors. And I think it's so inspiring that with Coriolanus you used Shakespeare to explore what is a hero, what defines a hero. And in The Invisible Woman, it was a very different focus that was perhaps less flattering towards the artist figure. And here, the questions that you raise, which don't have easy answers. What is the role of the artist? Is it escape? Is it freedom? Is it something more? Does it have to do with the communal experience that we've just had tonight, where some kind of degree of performance and spectacle touches people and makes them think some more? You're about to do 4 different films. This man is about to play Handel in Hallelujah, Before the Messiah, back to M for the next James Bond film under Sam Mendes' direction with Daniel Craig, a film with Nicole Kidman called The Dig, a film with Alexander Payne and Emma Stone, a film playing Mies van der Rohe. I mean, I don't know when you're going to get the chance to direct again.
As you go through the list, still too much.
So, which is one way also of saying how profoundly grateful I am that in the midst of what is an extraordinarily busy schedule, you found time to return to 92Y and to this audience. We are very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to gather the gifts. I'll take one, but you got to take the other.